A little while ago, one of the wonderful viewers of this channel asked me to analyse a strong feminine role in a movie. So I spent some time thinking about what my favourite female roles are and which one I would choose to analyse. Until I realised that I wasn't actually asked to analyse a female role in a movie, I was asked to analyse a feminine role in a movie. Similar things, but they are very different. A female role is one in which it is almost entirely defined by the gender of the character or the actor or actress playing it, whereas a feminine role is a role in which certain qualities or characteristics are exhibited. Feminine characteristics. So I guess before I can dive in and start analysing a strong feminine role, first we have to define two things. The first one, what is a strong role? And the second, what are female characteristics? It's easy to look at this question and simply say it's the most heroic role, or maybe it's the most prominent role, maybe it's the role with all the best scenes and the best lines, but actually all of that is wrong. A strong role is one that is, well, you can break it down to three criteria. Number one, they have to be a character with depth and character. They have to feel like a real person, essentially. Number two, they have to act in a manner which is consistent with that character. Number three, they have to actively influence the plot. Those three things are essentials for creating a strong character. Now, if they also have a story arc which helps to demonstrate some growth or improvement as a character, then great. But that's really just the bonus. It's not necessary for a strong character. It's just very good if you can do that as well. A strong role doesn't even need to be a hero or the protagonist or even a good character. Villains make excellent strong roles. It's just that people are so focused on telling the protagonist story that quite often the villain or antagonist is just an afterthought into the process. And I really wish people would stop doing that. It's just as integral to have a good antagonist or villain as it is to have a good protagonist or hero. It's a topic that I feel so passionately about. I made a whole video teaching people how to write good villains. So there's really no excuse anymore. Go watch my video if you're writing a movie or any kind of story and you need help writing villains. Go check out that video because that's exactly what I teach you to do. Okay, so that's one definition down. But what exactly are feminine characteristics? Well, that's actually a little bit tougher to define because these things change from one culture to another, from one generation to another, from one country to another, etc. So you'll have to forgive me if my definition of feminine characteristics doesn't exactly line up with yours. There's always going to be a lot of wiggle room on this topic. Both men and women exhibit and contain both masculine and feminine characteristics in varying quantities. And I think that both these two things, masculinity and femininity, are essential to the maintenance and improvement of modern society. In my opinion, feminine characteristics are the following: sympathy, empathy, communication skills, emotional intelligence, and sensitivity. I would say that they are the 5 tenets of feminine characteristics. I feel like I should give a disclaimer at this point because while I believe that the things that I've just said are accurate, it isn't an exhaustive list and it won't apply to everyone everywhere because the nature and expectation of gender roles in modern society has been shifting for quite some time. That being said, when we view the population of the planet as a whole, these things still tend to be largely true. The problem with this question is that people, myself included, often confuse strong female roles with strong feminine roles. So we think that a role like the bride in Kill Bill is a strong feminine role because she's an incredibly strong character and she literally kicks a massive amount of assholes. But for 90% of her screen time she displays violence, aggression, dominance, lack of empathy, lack of communication, typically masculine traits. I'm not saying that roles like this are bad. It's a very strong role with a great arc, and it's an especially interesting and fun role for a woman to play. I'm only saying that the role, like many others, isn't really a good example of a feminine role. So after an extensive review of female roles in movies, the one I've selected may feel like an odd choice, since it's a science fiction thriller, but I think that one of the best examples of a strong feminine role is the one of Sara Connor in James Cameron's Terminator. Up until the role of Leia in A New Hope in 1977, roles for women in action, horror and science fiction were mostly as either damsels in distress, love interests or a killer's obsession, and they rarely affected the plot, tended to happen to them. Even the two most famous female roles prior to the Terminator were in Ridley Scott's Alien and George Lucas's Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope. Both featured strong female characters which affected the plot and were very clearly defined characters with a strong sense of purpose and agency. However, what's interesting about these characters is that neither of them was originally written female. For Ripley in Alien, screenwriter Dan O'Bannon wrote the role of Ripley, and in fact all of the roles, as gender non-specific and to be suitable for a man or a woman. So while Ripley was cast female, it was written with no specific gender in mind, which is perhaps why it's hard to classify the character as masculine or feminine. In the case of Leia in Star Wars, the role was originally written male, one of two brothers, which after a couple of script revisions became a female princess but still retained a lot of the masculine characteristics from its original form. Though I think it is only fair to say that Lucas could have gone with the damsel in distress but actively chose not to do this, and instead intentionally made an active role. Sara Connor, on the other hand, was written female from the ground up, which is probably why James Cameron did such a great job on creating such a strong character which still contained all of the classic feminine traits. The Terminator centres on a man who travels through time to save a woman from being murdered by a cyborg also sent back from the future. I'm not going to recap the entire plot, because if you haven't seen the Terminator by now, there's a good chance that you didn't want to see it. If that's the case, then I hope this video will change your mind. Sarah spends a lot of the movie on the run, afraid and completely unsure of the situation she finds herself in. It's only after the police station assault that we begin to see some of those feminine traits start to come through. During this scene, she discovers that Kyle has been shot, and she instantly wants to help and heal Kyle. While that seems like a normal human characteristic, we have to remember that just 20 minutes before this, she was terrified of Kyle and bit his hand so hard that he bled, even after he demonstrated that he didn't mean her any harm by saving her from the Terminator, and then not retaliating to her sudden aggression either. Even though she mentions that she feels sick at treating his wound, she does so anyway. And this is probably one of the most admirable feminine traits, the desire and need to care for injured and sick people. And this all stems from her empathy and her sympathy. Sympathy that he got shot while saving her life, and empathy at the pain that the wound must be inflicting. A lot of women are a little squeamish when it comes to injuries and blood, and I think this is mostly misinterpreted as an aversion to gore. Instead, I think this is really that empathy shining through. They feel, on an emotional level, what the injured party feels, and it's this that makes them squeamish because they're empathizing the pain. It's also part of what makes them caring and attentive. If any ladies are watching and think that I'm talking rubbish, feel free to let me know. We can also listen to the types of questions that she asks to find some evidence of another feminine trait. She doesn't ask about the future, if she's rich, or what the world is like. Her initial questions are all about Kyle's experience of the future and of time travel. She's more interested in connecting with him on an emotional level than extracting information from him. The exchanges are all about him, She correctly assumes that, as Kyle is a soldier, especially one from such a dark and apocalyptic future, that he probably wouldn't have had many opportunities to connect on an emotional level, as life for him is all about survival. She uses this line of discussion to help distract him from the pain while she tends to his wounds. She does ask about the future, but this is mostly just to help an emotionally stunted and psychologically troubled individual relax so that she can tend to his wounds. This whole scene is an excellent display of communication skills and emotional intelligence. Later, when Kyle reveals that he's never had a girlfriend or even been with a woman, her sympathetic side comes out. Again, recognizing the complete lack of empathy and warmth in Reese's life, she listens to him talk about his experience, realizing that he does need to connect on an emotional level. When his experience in training kicks in and he pulls back and closes down again, rather than allow him to completely shut down, she gives him the contact and comfort that he clearly needed to be able to open up and let go of some of that pain. It would be really easy to say that Sara has fallen for Kyle, but the script makes it pretty clear that she understands and sympathizes with his pain and trauma, and her move towards him is an attempt to ease that pain, to allow him to feel safe and cared for, even if it's just for a moment. Throughout the movie, she displays all the characteristics commonly associated with feminine psychology. She's caring, understanding, empathic, sympathetic, and communicates using a high level of emotional intelligence. It's easy to say that she's a passive character because the plot mostly happens to her, and it's Reese that usually saves her. But when he first arrives in the past, he acts in the same way you would expect a soldier from a desolate future to behave. There's little to no emotion shown or felt. He shows no sympathy or empathy towards Sara or the other people of the past. Everything is an objective. In the beginning of the movie, there's really not much difference between Kyle and the Terminator. Her empathy, understanding, and caring nature towards him humanizes him and reminds him of the difference between man and machine. She reminds him why he traveled through time. She reminds him what he's actually fighting for. While many other strong female roles contribute to their movies by kicking ass and dominating the screen, Sara's role is to remind everyone that amidst the horrors of war and conflict, we shouldn't lose sight of the things that make us human.